Introducing myself to book talk with my favorite books, part 1, Fahrenheit 451. Look, a lot of us had this book ruined by awful high school English teachers who decided to bully kids instead of teaching media literacy. If that was you, I'd encourage you to pick up this book again. This is the book for the media literacy crisis. A lot of people think of this book as decrying the evils of TV and saying books are superior, but there's a key line in the book that shows what separates characters like Mrs. Montag from the book people is not their preferred medium, it's their desire to engage critically with their media. It's not books you need, it's some of the things that were once in books. The same things could be in the parlor families, the TVs today. The same infinite detail and awareness could be projected through radios and televisors, but are not. On top of that, Bradbury is a master of succinct prose. When you realize how much he accomplishes in this little tiny book, it's really impressive. He also writes compelling situations that stick with you. As a person with sensory issues, I can't tell you how much I think about the scene on the subway where Montag is trying to read and the overhead announcers are yelling ads at him. Just saying, if you haven't picked up this book in years because of your terrible high school English teacher, maybe it's time to give it another go. Introducing myself to book talk with my favorite books in no particular order, part 2, Parable of the Sower. You hear a lot these days about how Octavia E. Butler predicted the future, and look, they're not wrong. The vision of late-stage capitalism in here will make you curl up in the shower and cry. But there are two major things that I love about this book. One is she doesn't leave you hopeless. The main character of this book is constructing a new religion based on change, and it makes you think about how much of your anxiety is just based on the fear of change, which is natural for humans. But one of the points of this book is that change hurts for a bit, but it can open up new opportunities. The other thing I love about this book is the way that it speaks to me as an autistic person. Now, granted, the supernatural element is Lauren's hyper-empathy. I don't think it can extend to physical sensations like it does in the book in real life, but let me know if you know of any credible cases like that. Still, the way empathy is portrayed in this book really speaks to me. It's shown as a disability, something that debilitates Lauren, that she has to work around. Even if she knows what she's doing will help her or the people she cares for, she still must cope with it. She can't turn it off, so she designs systems for herself to accommodate her disability in a very unaccommodating world. And the way the people around her react is so true to my experience as well. Her dad spends so much of the time he's in the book trying to suppress her disability and pretend it's not there. And she has to be careful who she trusts with this information because it can be so easily used against her, although she often ends up in situations where she has to trust someone that she doesn't know very well. That's all so true to my experience of living with hyperempathy. If you haven't read this book yet, what are you doing? Introducing myself to book talk with my favorite books, part 3, Their Eyes Were Watching God. When I was an undiagnosed autistic kid, I struggled so much with characters dying in books. I blame that on Charlotte's Web, probably because Bridget Terabithia was a little bit after my time. So for a long time, I wouldn't read a book where I knew a main character would die. I think it was Les Miserables that ultimately brought me back around to understand that sometimes a character's death is needed to fulfill an arc or to have a story be fully understood. Those are the pieces of art that reflect real life and help us make sense of things. Their Eyes Were Watching God is one of those books. It's about a middle-aged woman who, after 2 marriages to just awful men, finds love on her own terms. And it features one of the most heart-wrenching, devastating character deaths that you will ever read. But if you sit with it, pick it apart a little bit, you begin to see that it really couldn't have been any other way. Hurston is a masterful writer, telling an epic story in a really small package and setting these gorgeous southern scenes with minimal description. There are thoughtful, intersectional discussions of gender and race that someone more qualified than me could go into. My overall opinion is that even as a classic, this book does not get the hype that it deserves. Introducing myself to book talk with my favorite books, part 4, The Night Circus. And yeah, it's more vibes than story, although I wouldn't go so far as to say the story doesn't exist. It suits me fine. I'm like 90% vibes anyway. It's just lyrical and beautiful and fantastical. There is so much gorgeous description, but to me it doesn't feel like too much because it's painting these beautiful scenes. It does enemies to lovers without settling into the most tired cliches of the trope. And it just gives me so many things that I look for in a book while managing to throw in a couple of twists. I know I don't have to tell Book Talk how amazing this book is. I just am one more night circus girl. Introducing myself to Book Talk with my favorite books, Part 5, Braiding Sweetgrass. If you haven't heard of it, you're probably even newer to Book Talk than I am. This book was written by a female botanist who is also a member of the Potawatomi tribe, and she discusses the human impact on the environment from both of those angles. There's a touch of indigenous folk tales and a lot of personal stories that will make you curl up and cry in the shower. This book was recommended by a friend to me at an important time in my deconstruction of all the toxic beliefs that I was raised with, including climate change denial. I vividly remember the day that I was sitting in traffic watching the emissions come out of the car in front of me, and it suddenly hit me that if my parents had been wrong about all this other stuff that I was deconstructing, they were probably wrong about climate change too. And that is a recipe for depression and panic attacks. This book doesn't sugarcoat climate change. It won't leave you feeling warm and fuzzy about it. Sorry for the pun. But it does show that there's a path forward, that saving the planet isn't a binary or even a single spectrum. It's a bunch of ranges of factors, and every single one of those represents an opportunity to make a positive change. If you're feeling a little down about the impending apocalypse these days, consider picking up this book, The Right Way Up. Introducing myself to Book Talk with my favorite books, Part 6, Persuasion. Look, I love Pride and Prejudice. I will never get tired of reading it. There's a reason that it's a classic. But if you told me that I could only ever read Pride and Prejudice or Persuasion again, I'd pick this one. I was 27 when I first read it, and I realized that I would never read an Austen book again, being the same age as the heroine. Which sounds sad, but it was a wonderful goodbye to my 20s. This is a beautiful book with a more mature heroine that's so much more relatable. And oh my god, the scene with the letter, if you know, you know. 11 out of 10, only one note, signed Captain Wentworth. Introducing myself to Book Talk with my favorite books, Part 7, Pale Fire. And yep, that Nabokov. You cannot read this unreliable narrator and tell me he's serious about the other guy. This book is a compelling story constructed as a poem and an academic commentary of it. You have these two fascinating, well-built characters, and you have to unravel the mystery of the relationship between them. The poetry section is beautiful. The poet writes these gorgeous descriptions of his very eventful life from the end of it. But there's this thread woven through of appreciation for the beauty of the mundane. And then there's the commentator, and his sections are a trip. He poses as a super fan of the poet, even though he shows no real interest or understanding of his work. He's telling you this epic tale that doesn't add up at all. And as you read it, you have to reconstruct your understanding of this story over and over again. And with the structure, there's a little bit of criticism of academic commentary in it. Because you know there are commentators that are that obtuse. You've read commentators that are that obtuse. If you only know Nabokov from his more famous work, check this one out.